My boyfriend of 5 years broke up with me when his childhood friend returned. He blamed me for using underhanded methods to get him and forcing his friend away. But Axel, this time we're not getting back together. After going abroad, I heard he searched the entire city trying to find me. Axel came back unusually early today. By the time I got home, he was already sitting at the dinner table. The housekeeper brought out the dishes and then left. He looked at me, hesitating to speak, and after a long pause, finally said, "Caroline is back." My chopsticks paused in midair, but then I continued eating as if nothing had happened. That's good news. Caroline is the girl adopted by the Roland family, Axel's childhood friend. Actually, I knew she was coming back last week. On my birthday night, Axel promised to have dinner with me, but canceled at the last minute, saying there was a company meeting. However, I saw him picking up Caroline in front of the dance troupe. Seeing my lack of reaction, Axel seemed to casually ask, "I heard your dance troupe is selecting a principal dancer." I was a bit surprised and looked up at him. "Aren't you not interested in these things?" He seemed to think of something, a hint of amusement in his eyes, and said, "Caroline came back for the principal dancer position. If she gets it, she'll stay in the country. Savannah, you should step down and give the opportunity to Caroline." I stared at him in shock and asked uncertainly, "What did you just say?" He put down his chopsticks, composed himself, and squinted at me. I said, "You should step down and give the opportunity to Caroline." Clenching my fingers tightly, my heart ached unbearably. "Axel, you know I worked so hard for this opportunity." He interrupted me. "This is what we owe her." I could clearly see a flicker of disgust in his eyes. "If you hadn't gotten me drunk back then, none of this would have happened, and Caroline wouldn't have been forced to leave the country. So all these years, he had been blaming me, and look at that scar on your face. How could you possibly perform on stage with something so ugly? Who likes someone like you?" My heart felt like it was falling into an ice pit, and even breathing was painful. I said shakily, "Axel, I won't step down." He seemed to realize his words were too harsh and tried to explain. "Savannah, that's not what I meant. You know, I don't care about the scar. I knew you've just prioritized Caroline. As soon as she came back, you wouldn't even try to console me. Think about it carefully. Caroline is my sister. You're going to be her sister-in-law someday. What's the harm in letting her have this chance? If the chance to be principal dancer is being given up this time, what about next time? Will it be you next?" Axel didn't come home until after midnight. I tried calling him, but the call was busy and then disconnected. I called again stubbornly, and this time it was answered within seconds. Before I could ask when he would be back, I heard Caroline's aggrieved voice, as if she was afraid I wouldn't hear her. "Axel, do you think Savannah will agree?" Axel's voice was slightly distant as he comforted her. "Don't worry, Caroline, she'll agree." Caroline persisted, asking, "What if she doesn't?" He was silent for 2 seconds and then nonchalantly said, "Then I'll break up with her." "You don't know. Savannah is most afraid of me breaking up with her. It always works." Caroline gasped. "Is she the one everyone calls your doormat?" Realizing it was inappropriate to talk like that in front of Axel, she added, "Axel, I didn't mean it like that. You're not mad, are you?" "Of course not, Caroline. Besides, you didn't say anything wrong." The call ended there. As I stared at the darkened screen, tears streamed down, spreading like cracks on my heart. Just like my heart felt shattered at this moment, I never imagined that my love would eventually become a tool for him to control me, and that I was such a pitiable existence in his eyes. This house is filled with Axel's presence. I packed a few clothes and went back to my dorm. Before sleep, I closed my eyes, and his and Caroline's conversation kept playing in my mind like a cursed loop. I didn't realize I had slept until the next afternoon. Axel called, and through the phone, his voice was a bit blurry. "Where have you been?" I glanced at the time. It had been 15 hours since I left. His delayed realization meant he hadn't come home last night. Seeing me silent, his tone grew increasingly impatient. "Savannah, is this necessary?" I took a deep breath and asked, "Where were you last night?" He hesitated, thought for a few seconds, and then explained, "Caroline had a fever last night. You know she doesn't have any family. I took care of her all night." I recalled a time when I had a high fever at home and called him, barely conscious. The noise on his end was unbearable, with the chaotic music and laughter from a bar. I said, "Axel, can you come back? I feel terrible." He replied, "Savannah, can't you handle a fever by yourself?" I ended up calling for emergency help myself. Since then, whether it was a serious illness, a minor ailment, or a miscarriage, I handled it all alone. I heard Caroline's voice again through his phone. I hadn't expected him to bring her home. Caroline urged him to ask me quickly. Axel cleared his throat and asked, "Have you thought about it?" "I've already said, I won't step down." His voice turned cold immediately. "Savannah, let's break up." Axel changed the lock and blocked all my contact information. as if determined to force me to make a decision. He was sure I would come looking for him, just as he said. I was most afraid of breaking up with him. But Axel, this time, I don't want to compromise. Recently, there has been a lot going on with the dance troupe. Caroline and I are both candidates for the principal dancer position. We are both preparing for the final performance. Today, just as I had changed into my costume, I was called to the teacher's office. It was the first time I had seen such an expression on her face, serious and with a hint of unspoken sympathy. She turned the computer screen towards me as I opened my mouth to ask what was wrong. The words were swallowed back. I didn't know what the situation was when the photos were taken, but I recognized the room. It was Axel's home. A chill spread from my feet to my core, and I couldn't stop trembling. The teacher hugged me and patted my back. Child, take care of this first. The competition can wait. I forced a smile, unsure of what to say. I knew that this time, I would likely miss out on the competition. Leaving the office, I prepared to find Axel, but Caroline stopped me. She looked at me in surprise. Savannah, I didn't expect you to be so flashy behind the scenes. She shook her head and clicked her tongue. You're like this, and still couldn't keep Axel. It seems he really doesn't like you. To remind me that she's back and the things should be returned to their rightful owner, she added, if you steal something from someone, you'll eventually have to give it back, right? My hand clenched tightly, turning white at the fingertips. I said quietly, Caroline, do you think Axel still loves you? She sneered. He doesn't love me. Does he love you? Why doesn't he publicly announce that we've broken up? I saw a few cat hairs on her clothes and picked them off. Axel and you both dislike cats. Why do you think he didn't get rid of Cora? Some things are better left unsaid. Her eyes showed a hint of panic. Then she taunted. So what? What about you, Savannah? Do you know where those photos came from? Axel gave them to me. He said that if your reputation is ruined, you'll be kicked out of the dance troupe, and then you won't be able to compete with me. I had suspected this matter was related to Axel, but hearing it confirmed was unbearable. My heart constricted sharply, and the intense pain almost made me fall. I managed to stay upright and told her, since you like Axel so much, then he's all yours. Unable to contact Axel, I had to call the police. With their help, he came to the dance troupe to meet me, accompanied by Caroline. Axel frowned and angrily questioned me. Savannah, are you out of your mind? It's just a few photos. Is it necessary to call the police over this? When did you become so unreasonable? Don't you love me? Isn't it worth making some sacrifices for me? How disgusting. Tell me how you want to handle this. I looked at him, feeling dazed. The person in front of me no longer resembled the passionate young man I once loved. In that moment, I felt I had let go. This love that had consumed a third of my life. This broken relationship, he no longer wanted it. With this realization, when I looked at him again, my heart no longer stirred with any emotions. I don't need a private settlement. I'll sue you, Axel. Get ready for a lawyer's letter. His pupils contracted, not believing what I said, and he asked several times, what did you say? The argument had drawn many onlookers. I didn't want to stay any longer and turned to leave, but he gripped my wrist tightly, not letting me go. I looked at him coldly. What more do you want to say? He gritted his teeth and spat out, Savannah, who do you think you are? His grip tightened, almost breaking my wrist. I looked at him for a moment, then suddenly smiled. Axel, Caroline is watching. At my words, he recoiled as if touching something filthy, and forcefully pushed me away. We didn't notice a staff member pushing a cart propped behind me. I was thrown to the ground. The staff member hurriedly stopped the cart, but the box shook violently and fell, hitting my lower abdomen with a heavy thud. A sharp pain surged through me, and warmth spread between my legs. My white dance dress was instantly stained red with blood. Before losing consciousness, I saw Axel stumbling and kneeling in front of me, his face almost blank. He held me, trembling slightly. It looked like he was afraid of losing me. I self-mockingly denied, either could that be? The pungent smell of disinfectant swirled in my nostrils. I haven't been to the hospital much in my life, only 3 times, and each time it was because of Axel. I heard some noise at the door and opened my eyes. It was Axel, tiptoeing towards the bedside. Seeing me awake, he seemed flustered and handed me what he was carrying. Savannah, I bought your favorite cake. He said it was for me, but deep down I felt a wave of bitterness. It wasn't me who loved cake, it was Caroline. I only pretended to like it a bit more like her, a pathetic imitator. And even if he cared a bit, he would know I needed something light and soothing at a time like this. I turned my head away, no longer looking at him. He continued, why didn't you tell me you were pregnant? If I'd known, I wouldn't have pushed you. I could even detect a hint of reproach in his voice. I found out I was pregnant on my birthday. I had been eagerly waiting to share the good news with him. And what did he do? He found an excuse to send me to be with Caroline. Doctor's rounds. She said my constitution was already weak, and having had a miscarriage before, it would be very difficult for me to get pregnant again after this one. Despite my efforts to keep my emotions in check, I ultimately failed. I buried my head in the blanket, tears streaming down my face. The doctor's words echoed in my mind. I would never have another child. Axel answered a call and, with some hesitation, explained, Savannah, Caroline was scratched by Cora and is in this hospital too. I'm going to check on her. Without a second thought, he left the ward. My heart turned to ashes. I no longer held any expectations from him. Savannah, Cora is not doing well. Seeing this message, I stopped packing and stared, uneasy. I quickly asked what happened to Cora. She sent a video showing Cora lying on the operating table, covered in injuries. Her eyes were closed, and only a faint breath proved she was still alive. I rushed out of the hospital. When I arrived, Cora seemed to sense me and struggled to get up from the table. I lost control and cradled her in my arms as she lay weak. Gurgling sounds, her voice grew fainter, and her body cooler. In just 3 days, I had lost everything important to me. I collapsed on the floor, clutching her and sobbing uncontrollably. The doctor, though reluctant, had to discuss Cora's condition with me. He said Cora had fallen from upstairs. A kind-hearted person had found her and brought her in, but she was covered in blood. Moreover, her limbs had been brutally twisted, and she had suffered large burns for several days. I couldn't imagine how she endured such torment. After settling Cora, I went to Axel's house. Caroline answered the door. She crossed her arms and blocked the entrance. "You're not welcome here." I directly asked her, "Did you do something to Cora?" She showed no remorse, looking at me defiantly. "So what if I did?" I was so angry that my fingers shook. I raised my hand and slapped her, making her stagger. Her eyes quickly filled with tears. Her expression one of suppressed sorrow. The next moment, a strong force pulled me away. Axel gently cupped Caroline's face, wiping her tears tenderly. Then he pulled her behind him, his eyes filled with anger. "Savannah, how dare you lay a hand on her?" I stared at him. "Axel, do you know what happened to Cora?" He avoided my gaze. "So what if I do? It's just an animal. It's dead. So what?" I could hardly believe he could say something so cold-hearted. After my first abortion, I was constantly depressed. To make up for it, he gave me Cora as a gift. For both of us, Cora was special. I always saw her as my lost child. How could he treat her this way? I realized too late. In Axel's heart, no one could compare to Caroline. Not even a cat, especially not my cat. Suppressing my hatred, I told Axel, "I will make you pay for this." When I got home and charged my phone, it rang incessantly. Answering, a friend asked with concern, "Are you okay? I know you didn't do this. You should stay indoors for now." I cut them off. "What's going on?" "Don't you know? I'll send you the link." I clicked on it and saw a Twitter post. The video showed footage of Cora being thrown down. The comments were filled with anger, condemning whoever could commit such a cruel act. Then, one comment gained traction, becoming the top reply. "I've seen that cat. Its owner is a ballet dancer. I can't believe she's capable of animal abuse." Within 5 minutes, all my personal information was exposed. Phone number, address, and ballet company details. The doorbell rang suddenly, making me jump. The person outside seemed determined not to leave until I opened the door. My phone buzzed on the table, pressing urgency. "Unknown number." "Open the door." Leonardo had returned. The moment he saw me, he hugged me tightly. His warm embrace and familiar scent finally gave my heart a resting place. All the grievances and sadness I had been holding back for days poured out. He had come back immediately after seeing the Twitter post. It had been 5 years since I got together with Axel. He had gone abroad. We lost contact. I briefly explained everything to him. Leonardo looked at me with guilt-ridden eyes and said softly, "Savannah, I'm so sorry. It's not your fault. You don't need to apologize." I knew he blamed himself. If he had left, could he have protected me from being mistreated? But no one could have foreseen these events. The room fell silent for a moment, before being shattered by the loud banging on the door. Leonardo told me to sit tight and went to open it. When I heard Caroline's voice, I was momentarily stunned, fearing she might cause trouble for Leonardo. I stepped outside, only to be confronted with a surprising scene. Caroline, reeking of alcohol, was soaked by the heavy rain, her hair and clothes sticking to her. Looking utterly disheveled, she collapsed on the ground, clinging to Leonardo's leg and sobbing. Through her choked sobs, she seemed to be questioning, "Leonardo, why is it that after all these years, whenever Savannah is in trouble, you drop everything to be there for her? And I, who have been circling around you for so long, you never even gave me a second glance." Tears streamed down her face as she looked at Leonardo with an obsessive, burning affection. Ding! The elevator doors opened and closed again. Axel stepped out, quickly pulling Caroline up from the floor. He gripped her shoulders tightly, shaking her, as if unable to believe what he had just heard. He made a gut-wrenching, suppressed noise from his throat. "Caroline, what are you saying?" I pulled Leonardo back into the room, the outside door echoing with Axel's angry shouts, occasionally mixed with Caroline's sobs. By the next day, public opinion had escalated uncontrollably. People demanded that I respond, or they would come to my workplace to confront me. Meanwhile, I received a message from my teacher. The recent events, combined with previous issues, had seriously affected the dance company, and they decided to expel me. Leonardo read the message and said to me, "Savannah, how about coming to Italy with me? With your qualifications, you could perform on a better stage." I knew this well. Over the years, many dance companies had tried to recruit me, but for Axel, I turned them all down. If I had known the price of loving Axel would be so high, I would never have entered that room back then. When Cora first arrived at home, she was quite mischievous. To prevent accidents, I installed cameras in every corner of the house. At that time, Axel had brushed it off when I mentioned it, telling me to do what I felt necessary. I never expected that one day, these recordings would become crucial evidence. I compiled the videos from those days and posted them on Twitter. The video, in just 2 minutes, caused a massive stir. It resonated with countless pet owners, turning public opinion against Axel and Caroline. Leonardo worried they might come after me, but I thought they would likely be too preoccupied to bother. From now on, no dance company would want her in the industry. The thing she was most proud of in her life was destroyed by her own actions. Axel's company was at a critical juncture, the only chance for him to escape his puppet-like fate. The incident had spiraled out of control. His company's stock was plummeting daily, and many partners had ended their collaborations with him. The company's doors were painted with the words "A Life for a Life" in red. Their current address was exposed, and they received continuous threats and intimidation. He had to return to the Roman family, becoming a compliant Axel in front of the woman he despised the most. The weight on my heart finally lifted, and I finally dared to see Cora. Before the situation ended, I dreamt every night of Cora telling me how much it hurt. I told her that the bad people had been punished. I heard a rustling sound behind me and turned to see Axel. My head buzzed, and without thinking, I pushed him away. "Get out, you don't belong here." He staggered but steadied himself, his face turning pale and stunned. He kept apologizing. "Savannah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Can you forgive me?" I coldly asked him. "Axel, don't you have nightmares at night? Do you think the 2 children you killed and Cora will ever forgive you?" These words felt like a curse. After hearing them, he fled in panic. I thought Axel wouldn't appear in my life again after that day, but I didn't expect him to cling to me like a persistent past. He kept saying strange things, that he was sorry, that he and Caroline were no longer together. I found it all laughable. Today he showed up again. I had just returned from the supermarket when I saw him waiting at the door. He was holding a small box that emitted a faint meowing sound. He carefully handed the box to me, saying, "Savannah, this is for you." Afraid I might refuse, he quickly opened the box to reveal a tiny kitten inside. It looked a lot like Cora. I looked at him with a blank expression and asked, "Axel, what are you doing?" He lowered his gaze, hiding the shadows in his eyes. "I just wanted to make it up to you. If you mind Caroline's presence, I can send her abroad. When you come back to me, how does that sound?" His sudden change left me momentarily speechless. If he had said this before, I would have gladly accepted. After all, I used to care for him so much. But those words also brought me back to my senses. "Is it because you found out that Caroline liked someone else, and now you're trying to come back to me? Axel, why do you think I'd still have feelings for you now? You just make me feel sick." I walked past him and went home. He remained standing there, holding the same position until I closed the door. With things being so clear, I thought he wouldn't show up again. But the next day, he came back. This time, he brought Caroline along. We Saturday in a cafe downstairs. They Saturday across from me, and neither of them spoke first. The atmosphere was tense. When a server brought the coffee, Axel took it and placed it in front of me. "Savannah, your American coffee." I frowned in impatience. "Spit it out if you have something to say." Caroline suddenly spoke, telling Axel to leave. Once he disappeared through the cafe door, her cold gaze landed on me. After a moment, she let out a slight laugh. "Savannah, what's so special about you? Why has Leonardo liked you for so many years?" My breath hitched. I was overwhelmed with shock and disbelief. How could this be? Leonardo is my brother. Also, he kept it so well from you. You probably didn't know. In that instant, everything seemed to make sense. I asked her, "You like Leonardo, don't you?" She didn't speak, but her expression gave her away. Just like me back then, she couldn't hide her feelings for Axel whenever his name came up. I never understood why Caroline disliked me so much when we first met, but now it all became clear. 5 years ago, you received a text message and went to that hotel, didn't you? Memories long buried came flooding back. 5 years ago, on Axel's birthday, I received a text from an unknown number saying Axel was drunk and asking me to come over. Without thinking much, I went. When I saw Axel, I realized not only was he drunk, but he had been drugged. He was nearly unconscious, and that night was painful for me. I was used as a tool for his frustrations. The next morning, when he saw me beside him, he flew into a rage. He pushed me off the bed, causing me to hit my forehead on the edge of a cabinet and get a scar. He always believed that I had schemed to get into his bed and do those things. No matter how much I explained, he never believed me. As I was about to leave the hotel, he said he would take responsibility. That's when I learned it. He had planned to confess to Caroline that night. Even after Axel and I started dating, there was always an insurmountable gap between us. Caroline, that text was from me, and I was the one who drugged you. I didn't expect you to be so stupid as to actually come. Caroline's words pulled me back from my thoughts. I asked, "Why did you do that?" Her eyes filled with jealousy as she replied, "You don't know." Leonardo was listening outside the door that night. My heart skipped a beat. No wonder that after I returned home the next day, Leonardo said he was going abroad. No matter how much my mother tried to persuade him, he wouldn't change his mind. He was determined to leave. So, you didn't like Axel all along. It was Leonardo. Your going abroad wasn't because of my relationship with him, but because Leonardo went abroad. The issue that had troubled me for 5 years turned out to be caused by such a reason. Axel came back at this moment. I asked, "Did you know about this?" He said, "I just found out recently. So your apology, your so-called attempt to make amends, was only because you found out the incident wasn't my fault." Savannah, I know I've made many mistakes in the past. I'll do everything I can to make up for it in the future. Can you forgive me? Let's be together again. I remained silent. After a moment, I said, "Axel, we've already ended when you repeatedly abandoned me for Caroline. When you repeatedly crushed my heart. I won't accept your apology or forgive the hurt you've caused me. I want you to feel guilty for the rest of your life for what you've done." After saying this, I felt like I had truly let go. I didn't notice when it started raining outside. The raindrops hitting the glass began to fog it up. I glanced at the darkening sky, stood up, and prepared to leave. As I passed by Axel, he instinctively reached out to hold me. His voice was hoarse as he asked, "Savannah, is there really no chance for us?" I gently pulled my hand away, not looking back at him, and left the cafe. Leonardo was waiting at the door with a black umbrella. When he saw me, he offered it to me. I looked at him, my lips moving without saying a word. He seemed to sense my feelings and, as always, ruffled my hair gently. "It's all in the past. Let's go home." I couldn't help but remember the day he first came to my house. It was the 3rd year after my mother's death, when my father brought Leonardo's mother home and told me she would be my new mother from now on. I couldn't understand why he needed to replace my mother with someone else. So when he brought Leonardo and his mother home, I ran away from home. The person who found me was Leonardo, someone I had never met before. I was hiding in a slide at the community playground. I don't know how he found me. I only knew that when he found me, it was also raining outside. He was soaked through, extending his hand to me. His first words were, "Let's go home." Leonardo once again proposed that I go abroad with him. This time, I didn't refuse. It was time to end this chapter and start a new life. Recently, I've been busy with the paperwork for going abroad and dealing with Axel. He seems to be trying to prove he really wants to reconcile, showing up every now and then. At first, I ignored him completely. Later, somehow, he bought the house next door. On the first day after moving in, he brought over a bunch of stuff and introduced himself as the new neighbor, asking me to look after him. Eventually, it was Leonardo who gave him a good beating before he settled down. The day before leaving, I went to see Cora again. I talked to her a lot, apologized for not being able to visit often, and promised I would never forget her. Once I arrived in Italy, I was unfamiliar with everything here. Thankfully, Leonardo was with me. My father and his mother, knowing I had separated from Axel and had come to Italy with Leonardo, ended their world tour and came to celebrate with us. I couldn't remember how long it had been since our family had gathered. I ended up drinking too much. In the middle of the night, my phone kept buzzing with messages. I opened Wicket and saw messages from people who used to know Axel. They said Axel had been frantically searching for me, combing through the entire city without finding any trace of me. After reading them, I deleted all their contacts. In the past, I forced myself to do things I didn't like and be around people I didn't care for, just to be closer to Axel's life. Now, everything about him had nothing to do with me. Leonardo had introduced me to a dance troupe. They asked me to prepare a performance that would amaze everyone. I practiced day and night for a month. The night before the performance, I suddenly craved crawfish. Leonardo, unable to refuse me, took me to a hidden Chinese restaurant. I ate so quickly that I couldn't keep up with peeling the crawfish. I urged him to hurry. He looked at me with affectionate eyes, saying, "Just like when you were a child, whenever you were nervous before an exam, you'd want crawfish." I played dumb and didn't admit it. Who's nervous? The next day, Leonardo took me to the stage. Before I went on, he kept reminding me to just do my best. I teased him. You're even more nervous than I am. He stayed in the audience with the others, watching me. For some reason, I felt an unprecedented sense of security. Every movement during the dance was executed to perfection, even better than during practice. After the performance, everyone was silent. It wasn't until Leonardo led the applause that they seemed to come back to their senses. The troupe's principal came over to me first, extending a hand and saying, "Welcome to the team, Savannah." During my 3 years in Italy, I shone in the dance world. Many troupes extended invitations, but I turned them all down. Angel asked me more than once why I wasn't joining any of them. As long as she was around, I could never be the principal dancer of any troupe. I smiled and said nothing. It's impossible not to care, but I believe that someday, this position will be mine. I didn't expect that day to come so soon. There's an important performance in a couple of days. Angel has a chance to perform a solo. The day before the performance, she found me and said, "Yan, I'm planning to stop dancing." I looked at her in surprise. "Why?" Her smile was tinged with bitterness. "My foot is injured. I won't be able to dance anymore." My heart skipped a beat. Suddenly remembering something, I quickly asked, "Is it from last time?" During a dinner after a performance last month, a car almost hit me from behind. It was Angel who pulled me out of the way, twisting her ankle in the process. She shook her head, afraid I might overthink things. "Don't worry about it. It's not because of that incident. After I leave, you are the person I'm most confident in for this position. I hope you can lead our dance troupe to the next level." She gave me the only opportunity for a solo dance. She wanted more people to see me, to see Savannah. This performance was going to be attended by many aristocrats, and the entire troupe was on edge, training day and night, afraid of making even the smallest mistake. Backstage before the show, I overheard them gossiping about a serious accident at the theater entrance. The person who was rescued was covered in blood. My left eyelid kept twitching for no reason, and I felt an inexplicable anxiety. I pulled out my phone and called Leonardo. "Have you arrived yet?" He laughed and said, "We're all here. Who would miss the little princess's performance?" After hanging up, I breathed a sigh of relief. The performance went smoothly, and our troupe received a lot of recognition. Afterward, I went backstage to remove my makeup and, after taking a shower, I was ready to find Leonardo and the others. Just as I was about to leave, Angel, who had come in from outside, stopped me. Her smile was hard to hide. "Yan, you did it. They've just decided that you will be the next principal dancer of the troupe." I hugged her tightly with excitement. Really? I couldn't wait to share the good news with Leonardo and the others. However, when I arrived at the agreed-upon spot, I didn't see anyone. I called several times, but no one answered. A feeling of unease crept in. What if something had happened? As soon as my phone rang, I answered immediately. Leonardo's voice was heavy. "Savannah, I'm at the hospital." I panicked. "What happened? Is it serious?" "Which hospital?" "I'll come right away." He paused for a few seconds before saying, "I'm okay. It's Caroline who's in trouble." The mention of that name startled me and Axel. After receiving the address from Leonardo, I took a cab there. The operating room lights were still on, and Leonardo was waiting outside. "What's the situation?" Leonardo explained that they had been in a car accident at the theater entrance. According to witnesses, it seemed that the people had a quarrel in the car and didn't notice the guardrail. Crashing into it, it turned out that the accident I had heard about backstage involved them. Leonardo's hand was covered in blood, and I anxiously took a look. A ticket fell from his fingers onto my lap. He said, "This was in Axel's hand." My chest felt like it was being blocked by something, and I couldn't describe the sensation. Click. The operating room lights went out. Caroline was the first to be wheeled out. The doctor said she had suffered a brain injury and might not wake up for a while. I asked, "What about that other person?" "I'm sorry. We did our best." When Axel was wheeled out, I nervously lifted the white sheet. He lay there quietly, not breathing at all. I contacted Roland's family, but they didn't react much to Axel's death. Axel's stepmother said she was too busy to come. Leonardo and I took care of Axel's arrangements. On the day of his funeral, Caroline woke up, but she seemed to have lost her mind. She clung to a pillow, alternately calling Leonardo's name and Axel's. Whenever she saw me, she would throw a tantrum. We had no choice but to send her to a psychiatric facility. The diagnosis revealed she had a mental illness. She had no family, and Roland's family was not going to take responsibility. Leonardo found a care home and admitted her. One day, just after I finished dancing, I received a call from the care home. I had listed my number as a contact in case Leonardo was unreachable. "Savannah, Miss, she wants to see you." When I arrived, she was sitting in the garden, soaking up the sun. From a distance, she didn't look much like a mental patient. Hearing the noise, she turned to see me and said emotionlessly, "You're here. Please, sit." I asked her, What did you want to see me for? Her gaze was fixed on the distance, and when I looked too, there was nothing there. After a long pause, she finally spoke. Axel is dead. Are you sad? She didn't seem to care about my answer and continued. He came to Italy to see your performance. In fact, he came to every one of your performances. He only dared to hide in the corners because he was afraid you'd notice him. Isn't it pitiful? When you loved him most, he thought he loved me, but after realizing he truly loved you, you no longer wanted him. One of us is dead, the other is insane. Maybe it's heaven's punishment for us. Savannah, can you forgive him now? I didn't answer her because I had already given that answer to Axel that day. She seemed to understand my silence and changed the subject. How are things with Leonardo? Pretty good. She fell silent, and an untimely phone call interrupted us. It was Leonardo. He said he was waiting outside, and my parents had already gone to the hotel. It was their wedding anniversary, and we had planned to celebrate together. As soon as I hung up, Caroline asked, "Was that Leonardo?" She mumbled. I hadn't seen him in a long time. When she looked up again, her eyes were empty. You should go. That evening, when we got home, Leonardo received a call from the hospital. Caroline had committed suicide. We rushed to the hospital, where she lay quietly on the bed, with a note saying, "Sorry," beside her. I didn't expect to return to that place where I had spent so much time. Seeing my teacher, my emotion surged in my chest. She patted my shoulder just like she used to. Good child. I always knew you would one day stand on a bigger stage. This time, I represented the Italian dance troupe and was invited back to participate in an international competition. I wasn't nervous during the performance, but as the judges announced the results, I clenched my fist tightly. First place, the principal of Italy's Sunshine Dance Troupe, Savannah. I took a deep breath, bowed to the judges, and welcomed the cheers and applause from the audience. After the event, I left the hotel holding the trophy and immediately saw Leonardo waiting by the roadside. He reached out his hand and said with his lips moving, "Let's go home." The story ends here. Please subscribe to our channel for the latest updates and enjoy the daily novel updates.